Within the documentary of The Brink, Allison Clayman is trying to reach out to a very particular audience, and this is very clearly seen as she engages in a conversation with Steve Bannon about his political career, obviously, as he is the political strategist of the White House at the time, or was more accurately, and his relationship with ex-President Donald J. Trump. And this really does go into detail about who Steve Bannon really is and what kind of person he was in office. It demonstrates that he had a deep nationalism and a desire for populist change within the United States. And something like this is really meant to strike towards the politically intrigued audience. Something like this really is it just goes to show that within these documentaries, it really is about the person and their career that it's more focused on, despite the fact that throughout this visual analysis, I'm going to try and go into detail about nationalism as a whole. And within the documentary, it's very clear that it's trying to show an emphasis on nationalism and populism across the world, but it really does solely focus on Steve Bannon and his career and his pathway and the people he interacted with, his goals and whatnot. Although this is a good looking lens into what the political world was at the time, it is still very intriguing and also a good tool to see the world at large, to understand the true scale of things. Because of that, within the documentary, oftentimes Steve Bannon will be meeting with representatives or leaders or maybe even party leaders of different countries, different nations. And in his attempts, he's trying to set up a goal. He's making a finish line which will be a global populist movement. Despite his efforts and despite his constant attempts, within the documentary, we can see that he fails time and time again. And even within the White House, to one of the people who he believes is quote-unquote sort of Jesus figure of America, Donald J. Trump, he turns his back on him because of how absolutely almost delusional the idea is of a global populist movement. Because every single one of these leaders will seek only what is best for their own country, only what is best for their own image. Even to say that they seek what's best for their country can at times be disingenuous to who they really are as individuals. He oftentimes talks with Bolsonaro, someone who is known for destroying the Amazons of Brazil. And although on the surface it appears to be a great economic move, an attempt to make Brazil more of an agricultural country, it really goes to show that through double standards and hidden meanings and innuendos, Jair Bolsonaro hides the fact that he really is just selling off resources to companies that exploit his people, exploit his resources, exploit his country just so he can amass wealth, amass power. Similar to what Steve Bannon is trying to do. He's trying to accumulate power. He's trying to amass power from over the globe. And despite his efforts, he's constantly thwarted from different elements of democratic structures, of grassroots movements, of people simply saying no to his actions. Moreover, some of the people who say no the most are the nationalist populist movement leaders, because in their eyes, to try and attempt a global populist movement would mean that they would have to give up their power with other leaders of the world, which is something that they would not be willing to share. Although on the surface, they always attempt and act really friendly, it always shows at the end that they attempt to work only to the benefit of themselves and not to the benefit of others or of the people of the world or anything of the sort. Even within their own country, they're very conservative of the amount of power they're willing to give to any one group, any one person other than themselves. And because of this, he constantly runs into problems. And the documentary does a great job of showing Steve Bannon's failure at attempting to realize his grand ambition after helping Donald J. Trump become president of the United States. His grand ambition of creating a global populist movement, constantly falling and falling and falling, and despite always having some sort of overtly positive feedback from populist leaders, when trying to go into the effects, trying to go into the details, trying to hash out a plan, it always ends the same way, in which no one agrees, no one works together, and in the finale, it just shows Steve Bannon losing much of his credibility, losing much of his political power, because he cannot attempt to rally nationalists and populists across the globe. Maybe he can amass a handful within the United States. Maybe within one country he can gain a small following. But other than that, globalist, populist, nationalists will not work together when their only goal is populism and nationalism, because in its essence, it is an ideology of thyself and of oneself, and not of the other or the stranger or of the foreigner. It is an ideology of what me is mine is not yours, and as such, it is something that restricts his movements wherever he may go. Despite all this, the documentary still goes to show that Steve Bannon is somewhat of a threat, no matter how many times he fails internationally, because in the end of the day, he has a large gathering of supporters within the United States, and through might alone, many things have fallen. And because of that, it goes to warn and to show that although a grand global populist movement may not be possible, within countries, the democratic structures can still be collapsed through the horrific actions of single individuals gathering people in a collective of saying that the democratic structure doesn't work, or that the way we do things isn't right because some reason that they come up with. And this documentary does a great point of showing us a looking glass into what that world is like. And it is truly deserving of its rating within IMDb. It truly is.